In this video we will create a very simple setup for us to create different bolt threads procedurally. So with this one simple setup we will be able to create different threadings for different bolts. So this is a little bit different than my screw tutorial where the screws went outwards. This is the bolts and the threading goes inwards inside this tube object. So let's get into it and let's start. So this is going to be a little bit different approach than from my screw video. So let's take a look at it. So I took this kind of a diagram from how the bolt looks. You can see that the screws, the threads were outside. You can see that for the bolts they're actually kind of carved out of the initial metal steel kind of a circle tube. So let's try to recreate this kind of a effect. So first of all, let's put on a spiral soap from Labs toolkit, and now let's put down to the loops, make sure that it's at 1, and for the height let's make it maybe from 0.02 like that. So this is going to be basically our first how basically how high we want our spirals to be. Now just select it and put down the extrude, press F and move it outwards, and now all we have to do is in translate Y. Let's copy the relative reference for the height of this inside here. So this is going to ensure that we are always touching these two right at the end of it, like that. And now what we can do is just select it all, and then we can just duplicate it. And duplicate paste the same channel reference. So this is going to ensure that every copy is exactly the same here. When we start to copy it, every one of these are going to be at the same place, and we can easily fuse them together if we want them. So for the height, let's make it maybe a little bit smaller. Let's be something like this. What's great about this, since it's always going to update. So now let's do it maybe on like 7, because we are going to create basically top of the bolt, the bottom of it all, but bottom of the bolt, and then we're just going to duplicate actual threading. But first of all we have to create it, so this is a good start. Now let's just select everything and let's reverse our normals like that, and now select everything and just fuse them together. Just make sure that when you double click on it, you can select all of the loop around it. So now I'm going to select all of these, and let's make sure that we are now, basically this is our bolt top. Make sure that it's in one level like that. And now what we can do is select this one. Let's deselect the last one and let's bevel it. Make sure that you can bevel it, as much as you can. So still make sure that you are basically detecting collisions inside here. Now take a polyslip node and let's just add an edge loop right at the middle of this bevel, like that. And now make sure that we fuse them together again. And now we can just double click on this and just take a scale tool and just scale it inwards like that. So it's basically our threading, like that. And one thing again, what we can do is actually fuse this together. So just take the point 12 and just fuse these together like that. This is basically where our threading is going to end. And at the bottom of it, what we can do is basically we can just clip the ends of it like that. So first of all, let's start creating our bolt, our setup from all of this. So we know that we can always refer back to our spiral. Now just to test it out, let's put down a clip node. And so let's say you want to start, let's rotate it around. Let's say I want to just get our top of our object. So to make sure that we have a correct clipping location, what you can do is go back to, actually let's go here and let's paste inside the origin that moves inside here. So you can see basically going to clip the one of these regions. But remember that we also copied it. We copied it 7 times. So what we can do is refer it to the also total number of in this clip node. So just go in here, then just multiply. And let's refer to our so that's going to be our copy node. And that's NCY like that. So now you can see basically we are clipping, so let's take a look at it. We are copying before the clip, and after we are basically clipping, so that this is basically the, well, the copies are 7, but there's actually 8 of them, so because it doesn't actually count the first one. So what we can do is multiply it, and then in brackets we can add 1 plus 1. That's it. Now we have clipped the, and basically we haven't clipped anything because we are clipping right where the object is ending. But what we can do is actually start subtracting some of these options. So let's delete this +2, +1, and let's say for our top we want to actually also include another one. So what I'm going to do is multiply it by a -1. So basically we are now multiplying by this channel amount of copies, but then subtracting one of it. So now this is basically, and let's turn it around, this is basically our bolt top that we're gonna, basically the top of our bolt there, where the threading is going to end. Now let's copy this clip, let's rotate it again, and then duplicate our clip, connect it here, rotate it again, and just change the multiply. Now we want to not subtract 1, but actually subtract 2. And now this is our thread. We can start also thread and top, and for the, and basically that's it. And now what we can do is we can basically merge them together, and now we can take all this and duplicate it. And remember, duplication amount is the same amount that we have in our spiral. So in this, just make sure we are copying the height of it, go back to copy, paste it, as you can see it's copied to the top, and then just put the negative in front of the channel, and that's it. And now at the end of it, you can see we are creating this threading around, we are copying, and we can create as long of a bolt you want, like that. Now let's clean up this topology. First of all, what I want you to do is go and find out the very closest where the geometries are actually copied. Select everything and start fusing it. You can see, even with the most minimal distance, snap distance, is going to start fusing some of these points. So for me, I want even little than 0.001, so I'm going to add another 0 before 1. Now you can see we are not fusing together any of these points. And if you double click on it, it's still a 1 geometry. So make sure it's a very, very small amount of snap distance. Now what we can do is actually put down a lapse dissolve flat edges node. So you can see it's basically going to automatically delete anything that's on a flat edge, these kind of edges. So let's take a look at them. In here, you see it's automatically going to delete them, but there is one problem, it's not actually going to delete the points of it. For us to remove these points, what we can do is put down a facet node. In a facet node, there's a handy option for remove inner points. Click on it, and then just play around with it to see exactly for them to be removed, but it wouldn't harm any geometry. So let's take a look at this, like that. Now that you go clean up our topology, we probably want to cap these polygons, maybe if you want them, or you can start modeling out of it, but let's say I want to cap this. So what you can do is put down the polyfill. It's basically going to automatically select both of these, any open topology, and then going to cap them like that. Now what we can do is add some normals to it, something that smooths out this mesh. And with this basic setup, if you like the threads, we can just go back to the copy and make as much copy as you want, like that, for our threads. And of course, for the screw head, you can then just model it as much as you want, add a different heads to it, and so on. So now let's talk about how can we create, maybe if we want our threads to be bigger and so on. So with this my setup, we have to do a couple of changes. So one thing I want to show before, since we use the dissolve edges, you can see, so before dissolve, you can see we had this edge, which is actually crucial for the smoothing for this part. But since we use the dissolve edges, and actually there's no options for us to select the group. If you go inside the dissolve edges, it's a very simple setup. Actually, you can create your own HDA that with the group selection. So if you don't want to do manually afterwards add this edge loop, what you can do is basically create your own HDA, take a look at this, and it's all you really have to do is add another group after this group. So you can see it's basically creates the group, is default group node, and it's basically included by the edges, and min and max is set to 0. And then what you basically would do is add another group, call it the same one, and basically from initial merge you would basically subtract. So there's option for subtract that group that you just selected in group 2 that you would copy this node to. So it's pretty simple to actually not dissolve this edge, but by default it's going to dissolve it. So if you want to select it, if you want to fix it, after the polyfill, before we add any normals, just basically add this edge like that. And one thing you will notice that this is now to 2 points, so fuse these points and now put down normal. You can see now we have a very smooth edges inside here. So without it, it would look like that, and with this edge added like that. For us to create this kind of a threading with the optional, for us to create this kind of threading with the option to change the distance between the threads, we have to do a little bit of a different setup. So what I'm going to do is actually just take all of this network and just duplicate it like that. So first things first, I want to change the my flatten. So I use this flatten node, which is from Direct Modeler Toolkit, which is very nice, but it's not very procedural way for us to flatten out the top of this geometry. So what I'm gonna do is actually delete it. So what we're gonna do is procedurally actually flatten this out on top of it always, no matter where we are at the how high it is or how many polygons we have and all of that. So what we have to do is actually just select this edge loop. Once we have fused them together, once we have fused them together like that, just select it, and what we can do is actually put down an edit node. And edit node, there's actually option for us to pivot transform, only pivot transform. And we make sure that our pivot is right at the top of this geometry. If you remember, we actually did reference this geometry inside here. Where is the clip one? The clip one. So what I'm going to do is actually copy this one. Let's go back to the edit and put it in pivot translate. So let's take a look at it. So we have basically subtracting one. We do not want to subtract one. And what we're going to do is, like, I guess add basically, okay, let's just add it. Instead of subtract, plus one, like that. And now this is going to ensure that we always on top of this one. And now we have to in scale, put it to 0, like that. So now we have created the same effect as with my modeler node and with my modeler radial menu, but now when we go back to the spiral and start changing the heights of it, you can see it's always going to be right at the top of it. It's going to be edited down. And remember, this initial shape is just a blueprint for us to create actual threading that we're going to copy it anyway. So don't worry about if it's just a basic, just a setup for us to create the top and after that the threads. So in polybevel, you can see our polybevel still works. But if we want to make it bigger, let's say we now want our threads to be insanely big, you can see that polybevel has to make sure that it also goes to the. So what I would suggest is make it pretty big distance and then just go back and just scale it inwards like that. Let's take a look at polybevels. You can see it's still going to work. So you see you can go bigger and smaller. Just make sure that the polybevel is enough so that if you make bigger threads, it's still going to polybevel up until these edges. So one thing that we could do is add the division like that, but I actually don't like it because actually we can't get the actual group of it. What's cool about this? Let's say, let's just do basic bubble with 1. So in poly split, what I like to do, you see that we can add exactly at the middle of it, like that. And what actually we can do is actually create a group of it as an edge group, like that. Polyspad group. And now remember, in this poly split, what we did is let's actually delete everything inside here. Let's do it differently. So now that we have poly split, we can actually reference this group in our edit node. So let's put down edit or transform, and now in a group just select the polypad group. So what is it called? Polypad group, like that, and then just scale them inwards like that. Now we have basically the same thing. And now let's test out our geometry. So let's go back to the spiral, and let's say we want our height to be bigger. You can see our threads are actually going bigger or smaller like that. So now our pattern works. The one thing that you have note, if you want less points, you do have to reselect the. So what do we have to reselect? So let's say you want less of a points. You can see it starts to break up. So let's take a look at it. Let's say I want less points for our threads. So let's take a look what we have to. In a fuse, it's fine. In edit, we have to reselect what we want to copy to this on top. In poly bevel, we have to reselect our edges like that. And in poly split, we have to reselect the actually from split location. We have to reselect the split like that. And that is, since we're in edit, since we're referencing this, it still works. So that's one thing to know, that if you want to less geometry, not the points, the height, like that. So if you want to different values for your geometry, to make sure that you change all of these 3. So what I'm actually going to do is select all of these 3 nodes. So if I want to use it later, I'm actually going to color them maybe red, and also let's add a network box. Let's call them to edit. If you want to change the amount of polygons, the resolution of our spiral, so we know where to go for us to edit. So once you have this, this poly weld is actually going to delete it, because you can actually poly weld it at the end of it. So this all looks fine, and you see the setup up next is basically the same one that we had. So in the clip, we're clipping top of it. So in first one we clip top of it, and since we're referencing this channel on top of it, you can see it's the right clip amount. Another one, we're basically clipping just the one of the sections of the thread, and now we are copying, merging them together like that. Then we are fusing them together. Then we are dissolving flat edges. Then we are faceting to make sure that we have no points in the middle of the lines. And this is basically all of the. After the facet, what you can do is actually create another one. Let's call it cleanup. So this is basically our cleanup for our threading geometry. But after the facet, let's take a look at the spiral, and let's say we want our threads to be bigger. You can see we are still able to change the amount of threads we want, and our copies is controlled by this copy node like that. Another thing that we can do, so after the merge, after the fusing, the dissolving of edges like that, after the facet, since we didn't actually fuse them inside with the poly weld, what we can actually do after we have poly filled it on top of it, well, you don't even have to do that. So let's say this is geometry that we want. What we can do is actually take this polyfill and put down after that we can put down divide node. This is basically going to triangulate our mesh, and since it needs to be triangle, this quad that's not flat at all, it's basically going to be divided like that. And after the normals, you can see we're getting very nice normals at the end of the thread like that. So that's another way we can do this. So, and with this setup, let's go back to the spiral Let's change it maybe like that. Let's make more copies or less. Only thing we can do is change our normals like that. So I think that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful and see you next time.